Imagine with me for a moment, if you would. You walk into an ancient temple. You might initially picture the bare marble and humongous statues, maybe a few lit oil lamps and some priest or priestesses milling about caring for them. But this is colored by the modern ruins as you'd see them if you visited today. In reality, what would greet you would be thousands upon thousands of tiny statuettes, woven fabrics, baked goods, weapons and armor, even bandages, furniture, and other gifts. You kneel down and take a look at one small statuette, say of Athena, and the inscription on it thanks her for the lessons of wisdom the giver received regarding the loss of a friend. A small collection of armed soldiers thanks her for the strategy given by a general that led a regiment to victory. A beautiful tapestry proclaims her might as Ergane and thanks her for the artist's finest work. You, surrounded by a multitude of gifts, all representing moments of thanksgiving from thousands in your city-state, lay down your statuette, unable any longer to doubt the sheer influence and might of the gods. Let's take a look at Votive Offerings. Karate! Wow, you guys have been incredibly generous over the past 2 weeks. I have a lot of folks to thank for channel gifts. If I missed you, feel free to DM me on Discord so I can include you next week. From Ikeda Hakubi, we have War in Greek Mythology, which, exactly as it says on the tin, is an exploration of symbolic themes war has, with a particular focus on the Iliad and the Odyssey. From Ink Lantern, we have the Greek hero in 24 hours, which I'm looking forward to digging into as I continue my series on heroes. From John It, we have 2 more gifts, The Eye of the Beholder, Deformity and Disability in the Greco-Roman World, and Social Justice in the Ancient World. Both are going to be a huge help when I start getting into aspects of ancient culture we might not want to bring into the modern day, as well as how we can remedy these issues in our modern faiths. And finally, Child of Nyx gifted Placing the Gods, Sanctuaries and Sacred Space in Ancient Greece. This one is pretty self-explanatory, and I plan to make use of it in my upcoming video on creating altars and sacred space for yourself in modern Hellenism. Thank you all so much for supporting the work I do here. With one of my partners out of job, these new books are going to come in handy while he looks for a new one. Okay, this is it. The mythical votive offering I've been promising for, what, a month? Month and a half now? Regardless, it's here. Votive offerings have also become a bit of a hot topic in recent months, as I've seen debates break out about everything from the continued use of items for non-religious purposes to whether or not making the item yourself is a requirement. Though by no means definitive, I hope I can shed some light on a scholarly perspective regarding these things. As per usual, my focus is going to be on reconstructed Hellenism, but those from other faiths may find the information useful here as well. Votive offerings from antiquity comprise a large part of most museum exhibits and other displays of ancient Greek art and culture. I'm going to be referencing some pretty old books and papers for this one, as the most comprehensive work ever done on the topic was done back in 1903. As always, my sources will be cited in the description below, so you can double check my work and get some ideas for your own practice. So let's start at the beginning. What is a votive offering, you ask? It is anything that isn't animal or vegetal directly. Vegetal in this case including incense as well as food offerings. An example of a votive offering might include the peplos woven for Athena every year for the Athenian New Year festivals. Link is in the iCard if you missed the video that I did on them. Or the small terracotta statue of the goddess herself presented at her shrine. Contrary to popular belief, animal sacrifices seem primarily concentrated around festival days and for specific events, and vegetal and votive offerings appear far more common. So much so that the temples kept them in large storerooms and would regularly melt down metal offerings to sell for temple funding, or destroy terracotta and other such artistic offerings after they'd been on display for a certain amount of time. According to Arthur Cook in his paper, Greek Votive Offerings, there were 2 main types of votive offerings. The first were material items, which were given for their own value. These things include, in his words, things a god would need if they were a person, such as furniture, temple grounds, clothing, etc., as well as precious objects such as manufactured goods, ingots, coins, and akrotinia, which are items that are particularly rare or precious to the individual giving them specifically. The second classifications were idealized offerings, which were given for what they imply. These are more symbolic offerings, and we need to dig a bit to understand their significance. Sometimes these things are fairly simple bits of symbolism, such as miniature copies of Artemis and Faun statues found in Corcyra. Others are a little more complex, representing the power of the deity. The example Cook gives here is a small statue of Heracles with his club and lion skin, or Apollon seating on the oracular tripod on a relief from the Athenian Pythium. A human act of some kind committed by a city-state might be portrayed as being blessed by a god. His example here was given from Pausanias, where the people of Heraclea Pontica defeated the Mariadni and sent a group of offerings representing the labors of Heracles. Other examples included an anatomical model of a particular body part healed given to a god's shrine, figures of Zeus and Hera seated together as bridegroom and bride from Samos thought to commemorate weddings, and depictions of sacrifices, libations, prayers, dance, and feasts. Sometimes votives either were or depicted a prize won by an action that was blessed by the god. Examples included spoils of war or representations of them, such as a bronze group of horses and captive women sent to Olympia by the Tarentines after a victory over the Messippians, prizes won in games and musical contests, crowns of honor awarded by city-states to individuals, and choice samples of the work of craftsmen. The implements with which great success might have been attained might also have been given as votive offerings. Aristomenes, who put flight to a whole Spartan regiment by himself, dedicated his shield to Trophonios at Lebedea, according to Pausanias. Models of these items could be given in their stead as well, such as a golden anvil found at Delos. Similarly to the example I gave earlier of models of healed body parts, sometimes things like bandages no longer needed due to wounds healed by the god would also be given as votives. Clothing worn at a critical time in someone's life might also serve as a votive offering. Examples given here included a breastband given to Aphrodite and the robes of the Eleusinian priests. Keep in mind, it was during a time where all clothing had to be woven by hand, so most folks didn't have a lot. This was a pretty significant offering. Allegorical offerings also fall into the last category. Statues that personified concepts such as victory, luck, vengeance, etc., as well as groupings that represented ideas such as Athens conquering Eastern powers were also given as offerings to the temples. The majority of the example offerings contained inscriptions or designations of some kind, indicating who gave them to the god, what god they were given to, and for what purpose. This was important as offerings of this sort were considered at once public and private. It was important for the polis at large to know who gave these offerings, especially for the larger scale ones given by the tyrants in the early days, such as the massive statue of Apollon that the Naxians sent up, or Athena on the Acropolis. For those without a lot of money to spend, even small votives with these sorts of dedications showed that they were doing their best to honor the deity that had helped them. Quite often, votive offerings were either commissioned, in the case of more wealthy folks, or purchased from vendors at markets. Very small statues of various gods in terracotta and bronze have been found all over Greece, usually copies of the cult statue of the temple itself, often near identical to one another. Some scholars believe that votive offerings that were simply images of sacred animals usually given as sacrifices, such as pregnant cows for Demeter, were also used as substitutions for animal sacrifice, either because the giver couldn't afford to buy the animal, or give it, or because the giver had some objection to animal sacrifice. However, there's some debate about this. A stranger category of votive offerings were devotive offerings. This included the ritual sale of slaves to a god in order to free them, portraits of prominent figures given to temples in order to show that they had given their life to the god figuratively, and those who chose to give themselves to temples as servants in order to literally give their lives over. This is as close to human sacrifice as we get in ancient Greece, though that's a video topic for later this year. What does this all mean for the modern Hellenist? Well, for a start, it means that folks who say you can only give a votive offering if you made it with your own hands are ahistorical, though there are some considerations we might want to make as modern Hellenists around this. However, it also means that if you are an artisan or crafter of some sort, you have a lot of different options if you decide you want to give a votive offering. Later this year, I plan on making a video on devotional activities. Artists and craftspeople of all sorts get a sort of double dip benefit here, as creating the offering doubles as both a devotional activity, which I consider to be a type of offering, and that opinion has some historical backing, and they get the moment of giving it to the god. If you feel you've been blessed by a god during an especially rough time, giving a votive offering to remind yourself and thank them might be in order, especially if you decide to make it yourself. But please don't shame anyone who commissions or purchases votives. The ancients clearly did it too. What's most important with a votive is that it means something significant to you within your relationship to the god. I once wrote an article for an org that I was a part of about collecting and preserving rare shells from the beach for Poseidon, and am currently in the process of designing a devotional handwoven lace altar cloth for Athena to commemorate the years that I've spent in the faith and to thank her for the support she has given me for my channel and my growth as a person. Seeing that on the altar every day will be a reminder to me of my dedication and oath to her, and that's a lot of what a votive offering is about for modern folks. It's a representation of that special relationship you've developed with the gods. Votives, like all other offerings, need to be given with an open mind, in thanks or request. Though, as we've seen, votives themselves seem to have more often been given in thanksgiving in antiquity rather than as a request. A modern votive offering might be a small knitted peplos for a statue of Athena started around Plinteria and Kalenteria, or a new altar cloth or statue for a shrine. It might be a painting or drawing that is symbolic of a special blessing that you felt you received from a particular god, or a written song, story, or play dedicated to them. You might find a particular candle holder or statue that reminds you of them at a store in a garage sale, or you might have a cherished piece of jewelry or a toy from your childhood that you treasure that feels like a real sacrifice to dedicate to that god. As far as how to give a votive offering, I would suggest washing the item with carnips if it's the sort you can wash, or in the case of something more sensitive, sprinkle carnips on or around it to help purify it for the altar or shrine space. Present it to the god as you would any other sort of offering. Link is in the iCard for my video on prayer and ritual in Hellenism, and then find a place on the altar or shrine to display it, or take it outside and destroy it, making sure to either bury the pieces or wrap them to keep them in a separate from the trash, same as you would for disposing of food offerings or libations poured indoors. Wait, destroy an offering? As I mentioned in my video on offerings and sacrifices, link in the iCard if you missed it, most offerings in ancient Greece were burned. Offerings of animals had their bones and fat burned most of the time, though sometimes they would burn the whole thing for specific reasons such as forgiving a transgression. Likewise with incense, and libations were poured on the ground outside to make sure they couldn't be returned to the vessel from which they came. In much the same way, votive offerings were left at the temples for the priests to display and dispose of. That means that for us, lacking these sacred spaces, if we don't have room for a votive offering on our altars and shrines, that offering or another previous votive needs to be destroyed, so it cannot be used for a purpose other than sacred dedication to the god. Although many forms of practice can be valid, arguments over whether or not it is historical to use votive offerings in daily life are silly in my view. We don't have a lot of evidence that items dedicated to a god were used outside of the context of the temple, and although you could argue that priests might have used items like furniture or meat given an offering, there isn't really an equivalent to the priestly caste now. I've got a video planned on priests and priestesses for later this year, but suffice to say that simply practicing daily in your home doesn't necessarily make you a priest within the historical purview. In my opinion, using votive offerings for anything other than display or destruction is ahistorical. Votive offerings, however, can still be powerful tools for your growth in your relationship with the gods. They stand as a physical reminder of the good that has been done for you by the gods in the roughest of times, and can represent the love and devotion you feel back in the best of them. A mere glance at the objects on your altar can fill you with awe and gratitude and remind you that the gods are always and have always been with you. Though we'll never have the experience of crafting or commissioning these sacred things and beholding the sheer volume of others who trek to the temple to leave theirs there, we can create our own continuous record of our experiences in the modern day with votive offerings left on our own altars and shrines. They are goddess made manifest in your space, and that alone is beautiful and special. Choose or create your votive offerings with care, and they will serve both you and the gods for a long time to come. Thank you so much for sticking through that. If you're new here, sculpt the subscribe button and smash the like with the hammer to make room for it. Drop down into the comments and tell me about any votive offerings you've given or plan to give to the gods. Or just yell at me about how I'm not Greek enough to be talking about Hellenism if that's your speed. Special thanks to GaelicNox, as always, for the channel art. Links are in the description below to their website and Twitter. And special thanks to my patrons. I'm finally getting back to edited content, which is what most of you signed on to help support. Without you, my lights wouldn't still be on, and I wouldn't have my subscription to JSTOR and to the Adobe Suite to even make this video while one of my partners is out of work. Thanks to you all, I'm able to do deep dives into research on topics like this one, and sometimes even pick up monographs that are a little rarer when I catch them on offer. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever remain positive. And remember, we're stronger together.